Welcome to Golf Training Hacks. There are many factors that produce power and limit swing flows in the golf swing. But one factor that's often overlooked by many recreational golfers is the fact that the golf swing is a sequential deceleration. It's the proper sequencing of that deceleration that produces power and limits swing flows. And it's strong and mobile hips that enables you to properly sequence that deceleration. Because without strong and mobile hips, you can't control the rotational forces in the golf swing. And if you can't control the rotational forces in the golf swing, you can't properly time the deceleration. And that's going to reduce power, and that's going to create mishits. Here's why. So the proper timing of the sequencing of the deceleration in a golf swing is how we create the double pendulum effect in the golf swing. Now that effect helps us create the easy power in the golf swing, and it also helps us with consistency in shot making. And we can check out what the double pendulum effect looks like by looking into what an ancient war machine looks like. And we're going to take a look at something called a trebuchet. Now, if you've never heard of a trebuchet, it's a mechanical device that slings a projectile. And let's talk about how that works, because the interaction of our body and the club is a lot like how a trebuchet works. So a trebuchet would have a base with a crank or a winch on it. It has a beam, and the beam is attached to the base at a pivot point. Now on this side of the pivot point there's a counterweight, and on this side there's a sling attached to a pouch. So the trebuchet works like this. In the starting position, there's a wide angle between the sling and the beam. Now the crank winches up the counterweight, and this is going to store a lot of potential energy. So the pouch runs along a rail or a glide path, and as the winch raises the counterweight, there's a smaller angle between the sling and the beam. Now there's a latch that gets released, and that releases all this potential energy because the counterweight's going to drop. So as the counterweight drops, the beam spins around its axis, around the pivot point, the angle gets wider, and at the top of the rotation, the beam stops and the projectile is sent on its way. That's a lot like the golf swing. In the starting position, there's a wide angle. When the winch cranks up the beam and raises that weight, all that potential energy is wound up, and when it's released from the latch, the angle gets wider, and at the widest point of the angle, the beam decelerates and stops, and then the projectile is on its way. So clearly, stopping is important, right? Decelerating is important, because if you just kept going around in a circle, well, nothing would happen. The projectile would never get released. But it's not just stopping that's important, it's where it stops. So if this is the starting point and the beam stops here, well, that's very different than stopping here or stopping here, right? A lot more force here, but the projectile is going to go in a much different direction than if we stop here or we stop here. And there's a lot less force here. So it's not only stopping, it's the timing of the deceleration that's important. And that's a lot like the golf swing. So let's compare the golf swing to a trebuchet. So let's compare the interaction between the club and our body as the mechanics or the physics of a trebuchet. So consider that your body, your hips and your torso are the winch and the base. Your arms are the beam. The club is the sling. And your hands and wrists is the pivot point. So at address, we have a big angle between our club and our hands. As we get into our leg position, we have a smaller angle. It's the same thing as the trebuchet. So it starts with a big angle, it winds up into a smaller angle. So that's what you're doing in the golf swing. You're winding up your torso and your shoulders and your forearms, and the connective tissue and muscles in your forearms and your torso are getting stretched and wound up, and that's a lot of potential energy that's waiting to be released. As the latch is released, that potential energy starts working. Well, the latch for us is our hips. So as you take your backswing and you begin to move your hips away from your hands, that's how you're setting leg, but you're still winding things up, but your hips are moving forward because you should be setting leg prior to the top of your backswing. So your hip movement begins to unleash the potential energy of all this stored up energy in your connective tissue and muscles. So now as you go through your downswing and you come into impact, the angle between the club and your arms is wider, just like the trebuchet, right? We started here and we end up here. That's how the energy is released. And then you release it fully in front of impact. So it's a lot like the trebuchet. The golf swing mechanics it's a double pendulum effect, just like the trebuchet is. But the key is, it's not just the deceleration, it's where the deceleration starts, it's the timing. And that's why you need strong and mobile hips, because your hips start the sequence that unlatches that potential energy, but it's also going to stop, or rather, in our case, decelerate the golf swing by putting the weight forward and extending backwards. Then as you shift your weight forward and extend your hip backwards, this shoulder and arm is also extending backwards, lifting up and extending backwards, and that's actually slowing things down. So as you extend backwards, your hips slow down, and your torso slows down, your shoulders slow down, arms slow down, hands slow down, shaft slows down, and all that potential energy that was wound up gets thrown into the club face and then into the ball. Now, suppose that you don't have the strength and hip mobility to do this. I mean, it's easy for me to do this here. I'm just standing here. But there's a lot of force in the golf swing, and it's a high-speed rotation. It takes a lot of strength and stability to get to the front side, stay stable, and then extend backwards. So let's take a few examples of what would happen if you don't do that. Well, you might stop square to impact, and that means you're going to cast. And all that potential energy is going to be burnt up here. You're going to be releasing the timing or the sequencing of the deceleration too early, and then you're going to flip and you cast and flip at the ball, and that's not good. Your club head speed is going to slow down, and it's going to lead to more mishits because you're not going to have as much control over the club head. Or maybe you sway out over your front foot instead of extending backwards. That's going to throw off the timing of your swing. Or maybe you can't get here or even here, and you hang back on your back leg, and that's going to throw off the timing of the golf swing and the sequencing of the deceleration. So, strong and mobile hips are the key to creating leg properly and also creating the proper timing of the sequencing of the deceleration in the golf swing. You have to get that double pendulum effect to create that easy power. At Golf Training Hacks, we not only want you to play better golf, but we want you to move better and feel better every day so you can play the best golf of your life for the rest of your life.